The conference hall hummed with tension, its vast circular chamber designed to accommodate dozens of alien species. Holographic displays flickered around the perimeter, casting ethereal blue light across the assembled diplomats. At the center stood Creela, her iridescent exoskeleton shimmering with intricate diplomatic insignias that marked centuries of galactic negotiation experience. Dr. Marcus Chen looked completely out of place, a human, barely 40 Earth years old, wearing a standard diplomatic suit that seemed almost comically plain compared to the elaborate ceremonial attire of other delegates. His dark eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail with an intensity that seemed to make the other diplomats uncomfortable. Creela had noticed him earlier, dismissing him as another human academic invited to observe the proceedings. Humans were still relatively new to the Galactic Confederation, barely 60 years since their first interstellar contact. They were considered curious, unpredictable, and frankly, somewhat primitive by most senior diplomatic circles. The quantum communication array hummed to life, its complex matrix of energy conduits creating a web of light that connected the various diplomatic implants. Standard protocol demanded absolute silence during the initialization sequence. Standard protocol was about to be spectacularly disrupted. Nobody saw it coming. Not the technicians monitoring the arrays. Not the senior diplomats representing 17 different star systems. Certainly not Creela, who was preparing her opening remarks for the most critical peace negotiation in a decade. The first sign something was wrong came when Marcus Chen's neural implant began to pulse with an unexpected rhythm. A faint blue light emerged from the small technological node at the base of his skull, growing more intense with each passing second. Creela's own diplomatic encryption matrix, a complex biological-technological hybrid embedded within her neural networks, started to resonate with an impossible frequency. Quantum synchronization anomaly detected, announced a neutral computer voice, initiating emergency protocol. But no emergency protocol could have prepared anyone for what happened next. Information began to flow, not just data, but memories, experiences, the accumulated diplomatic knowledge of centuries condensed and transferred in milliseconds. Creela felt her most intimate professional memories, delicate negotiation strategies, nuanced cultural understanding, the weight of generations of diplomatic training, suddenly splitting, fragmenting, and merging with something entirely alien. With Marcus Chen, her body went rigid, her multiple sensory tendrils, typically used for complex nonverbal communication, began to writhe in what could only be described as pure, unadulterated rage. "No," she screamed, a sound that translated across multiple linguistic matrices as pure diplomatic indignation. "This is impossible." The other diplomats froze. Humans in the room looked confused. The alien delegates appeared a mixture of shocked and horrified. Someone dropped a datapad, its clattering sound seeming impossibly loud in the suddenly silent conference hall. Marcus Chen blinked. Once, twice, and then, with a composure that would have been impossible moments before, he adjusted his collar and looked directly at Creela. "I believe," he said, his voice carrying a cadence and diplomatic nuance that was absolutely not his own, "we need to discuss the Centauri-Krull border dispute." Creela's rage reached a quantum level of intensity that threatened to break several fundamental laws of diplomatic protocol. The Galactic Confederation would never be the same again. The quantum research facility on Lunar Base Alpha looked more like a cathedral of technology than a scientific installation. Massive holographic displays cascaded around circular chambers, each pulsing with intricate data streams that seemed to breathe with their own life. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the lead quantum entanglement researcher, stood before a wall of monitors, her hands moving rapidly across translucent control panels. "Impossible," she muttered, reviewing the data from the diplomatic conference incident. "Absolutely impossible." The quantum transfer between Creela and Marcus Chen defied every known principle of interspecies neural communication. Typically, neural implants were designed with strict firewall protocols, preventing any unauthorized data transfer. Yet somehow, In those critical milliseconds, something extraordinary had occurred. The initial diagnostic revealed a bizarre sequence of events. Marcus's experimental neural implant, a prototype designed to assist in xenocultural translation, had an unexpected quantum resonance capability. It wasn't just a communication device. It was a living, adaptive technology it could momentarily synchronize with other advanced neural networks. Creela's diplomatic encryption matrix was equally unique. The Zarkon Collective had developed a neural interface that stored not just information, but entire experiential memories. Diplomatic knowledge wasn't just learned. It was lived, encoded at a molecular level that went beyond traditional data storage. When these two extraordinary technologies met, they didn't just exchange information. They merged. In the research facility's primary analysis chamber, a three-dimensional holographic reconstruction showed the exact moment of transfer. Quantum threads, delicate as spider silk but powerful as plasma conduits, connected the two neural matrices. Information didn't just flow. It danced, twisted, and ultimately integrated. "Look at this," Alina said to her assistant, Dr. James Kim, pointing at a particularly complex data strand. The transfer wasn't random. "There's a pattern here, almost like a deliberate translation." Marcus Chen, still recovering in the medical wing, experienced the transfer differently. Memories that were not his own began to surface. Negotiation strategies from 100 different star systems. Cultural nuances so subtle that they existed between words, between breaths. The memory of a diplomatic resolution that prevented a war between the Centauri mining colonies and the Krull Resource Management Consortium. A negotiation that had taken 3 standard galactic years to complete. These were Creela's memories, but they were now part of him. In another part of the facility, Creela underwent her own diagnostic. Her species' medical technology was light years beyond human understanding. Nanodiagnostic probes explored every neural pathway, every quantum entanglement point. Her response to the transfer was a mixture of scientific curiosity and profound cultural outrage. "This is a violation." She communicated through a translation matrix, her multiple sensory tendrils vibrating with emotional intensity. A complete breach of diplomatic protocol. The researchers exchanged glances. They understood the magnitude of what had happened. This wasn't just a technological anomaly. This was potentially a new form of interspecies communication, a bridge between fundamentally different neural architectures. Dr. Rodriguez pulled up the final diagnostic report. The numbers told a story more complex than words ever could. The neural transfer wasn't just a data exchange. It was a complete, symbiotic integration that defied every existing scientific model. Marcus Chen, when he finally emerged from the medical wing, moved differently. His gestures carried a precision that wasn't purely human. His eyes reflected knowledge that spanned multiple civilizations. Creela watched him, her initial rage slowly transforming into something more complex. Curiosity, concern, and a growing realization that this incident was far more significant than a simple technological malfunction. The Galactic Confederation was about to change forever, and neither Marcus nor Creela fully understood how. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps headquarters was a massive spherical structure that floated in the neutral space between 3 major star systems. Its architecture defied human understanding. A living, breathing bureaucratic organism that shifted and realigned based on complex diplomatic algorithms. Inside the central arbitration chamber, chaos reigned. Senior Administrator Vornak, a crystalline being whose body constantly shifted between solid and semi-liquid states, slammed a translucent gavel made of compressed quantum data. "This is unprecedented." The translation matrix carried his words with a mixture of anger and bureaucratic frustration. Creela stood to one side, her diplomatic insignias now appearing slightly distorted, a visual representation of her compromised status. Marcus Chen stood opposite her, surprisingly calm, his posture suggesting a confidence that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his own experience. The emergency hearing had been called to determine the fate of the diplomatic transfer. 17 different species were represented, each with their own complex legal interpretations of what had just happened. The Centauri representative, a silicon-based life form that communicated through intricate light patterns, projected a holographic legal brief. Thousands of interconnected legal precedents formed a massive three-dimensional web of argument. The core question was simple yet impossible. Could a diplomatic matrix be transferred? Could decades, even centuries, of diplomatic training be accidentally inherited? The human cannot represent the Zarkon collective, Kriela argued, her communication tendrils creating complex emotional patterns that spoke volumes beyond her actual words. He lacks the fundamental cultural understanding. He is an intruder, a technological accident. Marcus responded differently than anyone expected. Instead of arguing, he simply activated the small device. Suddenly, the entire chamber was filled with a perfect holographic recreation of a delicate negotiation from 30 years ago, a moment Kriela had personally managed between two warring methane-breathing civilizations. Every nuance was perfect. Every subtle gesture, every unspoken diplomatic compromise. The chamber fell silent. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, called as a technical expert, explained the quantum transfer with a precision that cut through the bureaucratic noise. "This isn't a simple data transfer," she said. "It's a complete neural symbiosis. The diplomatic matrix didn't just copy itself. It integrated." Vornak's crystalline body flickered, representing deep contemplation. The bureaucratic algorithms that govern diplomatic protocols were running millions of potential scenarios per second. No precedent existed for this situation. 3 options present themselves, Vornak finally announced. 1. Complete diplomatic matrix extraction and restoration to original holder. 2. Permanent transfer to the human. 3. A collaborative diplomatic representation. The last option was revolutionary. Never before had 2 beings from different species been suggested to jointly hold a diplomatic mandate. Marcus Chen stepped forward. When he spoke, the words carried Kriela's decades of diplomatic training, but with a uniquely human interpretation. The galaxy doesn't need perfect preservation of old methods. It needs evolution. Kriela felt something she had never experienced before, a mixture of anger, respect, and an emerging understanding that defied her entire cultural training. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps was about to make history, and nobody, not the bureaucrats, not the legal experts, not even Marcus and Kriela themselves, knew exactly what would happen next. Outside the chamber, the stars continued their silent dance, indifferent to the bureaucratic storm brewing within. The Nexus station hung like a delicate crystal between 3 potentially explosive star systems: the Krell mining colonies, the Centauri resource management territories, and the independent frontier worlds had been on the brink of a war that could destroy entire solar systems. Marcus Chen walked into the primary negotiation chamber, and everything changed. His steps carried a precision that was part Kriela's decades of diplomatic training, part uniquely human unpredictability. Behind him, Kriela observed, her multiple sensory tendrils twitching with a complex mixture of anticipation and barely contained frustration. The representatives from the 3 conflicting civilizations looked nothing like what humans would consider typical sentient beings. The Krell delegation resembled massive crystalline structures that shifted and reformed constantly. The Centauri appeared as intricate networks of bioluminescent energy patterns. The frontier world representatives were a mixture of cybernetic and organic entities that defied simple classification. "We are here," Marcus began, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to come from somewhere beyond himself, "to prevent a conflict that will destroy more than just territories. We are here to preserve potential." The translation matrices worked overtime, converting not just words but the complex emotional and cultural nuances behind those words. The Krell primary representative, a massive crystalline structure named Zertok, pulsed with an aggressive energy. "Your species has been part of the Galactic Confederation for less than a standard century. What could you possibly understand about our territorial disputes?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he activated a holographic display that showed the intricate resource networks connecting the three territories. But this wasn't a typical diplomatic presentation. This was a living, breathing representation that showed not just current resources, but potential future developments. Creela watched in growing amazement. This was her diplomatic training, but transformed. Humans approached problems differently. They didn't just see obstacles. They saw opportunities. The holographic display began to show potential collaborative scenarios: resource sharing, joint technological development, economic models that benefited all parties instead of creating winners and losers. Your conflict, Marcus continued, is not about resources. It's about fear of limited potential. The chamber fell silent. Zertok's crystalline structure began to shift. The aggressive energy started to transform into something more complex. Curiosity, confusion, potential understanding. Creela's sensory tendrils recognized something extraordinary happening. Marcus wasn't just presenting a diplomatic solution. He was rewriting the entire approach to conflict resolution. The Centauri representative, a being of pure energy named Vexna, responded first. Explain, came the communication, a complex wave of light and emotional resonance. Marcus spent the next 3 hours doing something unprecedented. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate in the traditional sense. He told a story about human potential, about how a species that had been technologically primitive just a century ago had learned to collaborate, to see beyond immediate conflicts. He shared historical examples, not just human history, but the accumulated diplomatic knowledge now integrated into his neural matrix. Conflict resolution strategies from 100 different civilizations, viewed through a uniquely human lens of possibility. The negotiation was transforming into something more than a diplomatic meeting. It was becoming a cultural exchange, a redefinition of potential. Outside the negotiation chamber, the stars continued their silent dance. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the future was being rewritten. And no one, not the delegates, not the diplomatic corps, not even Marcus and Creela, fully understood how profound this moment truly was. The aftermath of the Nexus Station negotiations sent shockwaves through the Galactic Confederation. What should have been a decades-long conflict had been resolved in less than 48 standard hours, a feat that seemed impossible to most diplomatic experts. Marcus Chen sat in the observation deck of the diplomatic transport, his reflection partially overlaid with holographic data streams. Creela watched him from across the chamber, her multiple sensory tendrils moving in complex patterns that suggested deep internal conflict. Something fundamental had changed. The quantum transfer wasn't just a technological anomaly anymore. It had become a living, breathing demonstration of interspecies potential. The Krell and Centauri representatives had not just agreed to a peace treaty. They had begun drafting joint research proposals that would have been unthinkable mere days ago. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research team was working overtime, analyzing every microsecond of the diplomatic interaction. The quantum entanglement that had merged Marcus and Creela's neural matrices was proving to be far more than a simple data transfer. It's like the implant created a new form of communication, Rodriguez explained to her team, holographic displays dancing around her. Not just information exchange, but a complete cultural translation matrix. Marcus suddenly stood, moving with a grace that was part human, part something entirely new. He approached Creela, his movements carrying the precise diplomatic training she had accumulated over centuries. "We need to discuss the next phase," he said, his voice carrying multiple layers of meaning. Creela's response was complex. Her sensory tendrils created a communication pattern that was part frustration, part grudging respect. The human had not just used her diplomatic knowledge. He had transformed it. The transport passed through a quantum corridor, a technological marvel that compressed massive distances into moments. Outside the windows, entire star systems blurred into streams of light. Their destination was the Central Diplomatic Academy, the most important training ground for galactic diplomats. Marcus and Creella were about to face their most significant challenge yet. The Academy was unlike any human institution, a living, adaptive structure that changed based on the collective diplomatic knowledge of thousands of species. Holographic learning environments could simulate millions of potential diplomatic scenarios in milliseconds. As they approached, Marcus felt something stirring within his neural matrix. Memories that were not his own began to surface. Negotiation strategies from civilizations humans had never encountered. Cultural nuances so subtle they existed between breaths, between thoughts. Creella watched him, her initial rage transforming into something more complex. Curiosity, concern, a growing realization that this incident was far more significant than a simple technological malfunction. The Central Diplomatic Academy's primary council was waiting. Representatives from 17 different species, each with their own complex understanding of diplomatic protocol. They would decide the fate of the quantum transfer. They would determine whether Marcus Chen could continue to represent the diplomatic matrix that had become part of him. More importantly, they would potentially redefine the entire concept of interspecies communication. Marcus looked at Creella. She looked back. For the first time since the quantum transfer, there was something that resembled understanding between them. The transport began its final approach. Outside, the Academy loomed, a structure that was part technology, part living organism, part pure potential. The future of galactic diplomacy was about to be rewritten. The Central Diplomatic Academy's primary council chamber resembled a living organism more than a traditional meeting space. Holographic interfaces pulsed with living data streams. Gravitational fields shifted subtly, creating unique communication environments for each of the 17 different species represented. Marcus Chen stood at the center, feeling the weight of multiple neural matrices converging within his consciousness. Creella positioned herself slightly behind him, her sensory tendrils creating a complex pattern of observation and barely contained tension. The quantum transfer challenges everything we understand about diplomatic communication, announced Senior Arbiter Xentak, a being composed of interconnected energy networks that constantly reshape themselves. The hearing was both a technical investigation and a cultural trial. Each representative had access to millions of years of diplomatic precedents. Holographic displays showed quantum entanglement records, neural matrix analyses, and complex legal interpretations that twisted and transformed with each passing moment. Dr. Elena Rodriguez presented her research, her hands moving through holographic data streams with surgical precision. "This isn't a simple data transfer," she explained. "It's a complete neural symbiosis that defies our current understanding of interspecies communication." The most shocking evidence was Marcus himself. When he spoke, the words carried layers of meaning that transcended traditional language. Diplomatic strategies from 100 different civilizations merged with a uniquely human approach to problem solving. Suddenly, the chamber's environmental systems began to fluctuate. A simulation began, a diplomatic scenario so complex that it had defeated every previous negotiation attempt. The scenario involved 3 methane-breathing civilizations locked in a centuries-old conflict over resource-poor territories. Previous diplomatic missions had failed spectacularly. Thousands of potential solutions had been analyzed and rejected. Marcus didn't just approach the simulation. He transformed it. Where traditional diplomats would present legal arguments, he introduced a collaborative framework. Where previous negotiations had focused on territorial claims, he presented a vision of shared potential. His approach wasn't just about solving the immediate conflict. It was about reimagining the entire concept of territorial ownership. Creella watched in growing amazement. This was her diplomatic training, but viewed through a lens she had never considered. Humans didn't just see obstacles, they saw opportunities for transformation. The simulation's complexity increased. Environmental challenges, cultural misunderstandings, deep-rooted historical conflicts. Each new layer would have typically paralyzed traditional diplomatic approaches. Marcus navigated the scenario with a fluidity that defied explanation. Part of it was Creella's accumulated diplomatic knowledge. Part of it was something entirely new. a human capacity for creative problem-solving that seemed to emerge from the quantum transfer. The council members began to change. Their energy patterns shifted. Communication matrices that had been fixed for centuries started to reconfigure. "Impossible," muttered Zermoth, the oldest diplomatic representative present. But even as he spoke, his own neural networks were being subtly transformed by what was unfolding. The simulation reached its critical point, a moment where every previous diplomatic mission had failed. Marcus didn't negotiate. He reimagined. Three methane-breathing civilizations that had been enemies for centuries suddenly saw a path to collaboration that no one had ever conceived before. The chamber fell silent. Outside, the stars continued their silent dance. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, something fundamental was changing. And no one, not the delegates, not the researchers, not even Marcus and Creella, fully understood how profound this moment truly was. The personal transformation happened slowly, almost imperceptibly. Creella found herself changing in ways she could never have anticipated. The quantum transfer wasn't just a technological accident anymore. It was becoming a journey of personal discovery that challenged everything she understood about diplomatic service. In the quiet moments between official proceedings, she watched Marcus Chen with a growing sense of something that felt remarkably like respect. His approach to diplomacy was nothing like the rigid, protocol-driven methods she had perfected over centuries. Humans, she realized, saw the universe differently. Where Zarkam diplomatic training emphasized preservation of existing structures, Marcus approached each challenge as an opportunity for complete reimagination. His neural matrix, now a hybrid of human creativity and her accumulated knowledge, demonstrated a flexibility that was both terrifying and fascinating. The research facility became their temporary home. Dr. Elena Rodriguez continued her detailed studies, mapping every subtle change in their neural networks. Holographic displays tracked the quantum entanglement, revealing increasingly complex patterns of integration. "It's not just data transfer," Rodriguez explained during one of her briefings. "It's a complete cognitive symbiosis. Your diplomatic matrices aren't just sharing information. They're creating something entirely new." Creela's cultural training had always emphasized emotional detachment. Diplomats were supposed to be objective observers, not participants. But the quantum transfer was breaking down those rigid boundaries. She began to experience human emotions with a complexity that both frightened and intrigued her. Curiosity, doubt, a strange sense of excitement about potential. Marcus, for his part, was equally transformed. The diplomatic knowledge he had inherited wasn't just a collection of strategies. It was a living, breathing understanding of galactic complexity that went beyond simple information. During one particularly intense research session, something extraordinary happened. A complex diplomatic scenario was introduced, a conflict simulation so intricate that it had defeated every previous attempt at resolution. Traditionally, this would have been a moment for detailed protocol analysis. Instead, Marcus and Creella began to communicate in a way that transcended language. Their neural matrices, now deeply entangled, started to generate solutions that were neither purely human nor entirely Zarkon. It was a new form of problem-solving that drew from both their experiences, creating something genuinely unique. The research team watched in amazement. The holographic displays showed neural pathways lighting up in patterns never before observed. Complex quantum threads danced between their consciousness, creating bridges where barriers had always existed. "We are becoming something more," Creella communicated, her sensory tendrils creating a pattern of profound realization. Marcus understood her not through words, but through a deep, intuitive connection that had emerged from their quantum entanglement. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps was about to face its most significant challenge. This wasn't just a technological anomaly anymore. It was a fundamental reimagining of interspecies communication. Outside the research facility, the stars continued their silent dance. Entire civilizations existed in the vast darkness, waiting to be understood in ways they had never imagined possible. Creella looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back. For the first time since the quantum transfer, they saw each other not as separate entities, but as part of something much larger. A potential for understanding that went beyond species, beyond technology, beyond everything they had previously known. The transformation was complete, and it was just beginning. The Galactic Confederation Assembly Hall stood as a testament to millennia of interspecies diplomacy. Its architecture defied simple understanding, a living structure that could adapt to the communication needs of hundreds of different civilizations. Today, everything would change. Marcus Chen and Kriela stood at the center of the massive circular chamber. 17 primary diplomatic representatives surrounded them, their forms ranging from crystalline energy beings to complex biomechanical entities. Holographic displays flickered with millions of years of diplomatic precedent, all about to be challenged. Senior Administrator Vornak, the crystalline being who had first presided over the quantum transfer hearing, spoke first. The quantum diplomatic transfer represents the most significant challenge to our existing protocols in galactic history. Marcus stepped forward. When he moved, it was with a grace that blended Kriela's centuries of diplomatic training with a uniquely human sense of potential. His neural matrix now represented something entirely new, a bridge between species, between ways of thinking. Diplomacy is not about preserving old structures, he began, his voice carrying multiple layers of meaning. It's about creating new possibilities. The holographic displays began to show the unprecedented outcomes of their collaborative approach. Conflict zones that had been impossible to resolve now showed pathways to mutual understanding. Resource-poor territories transformed into collaborative research zones. Civilizations that had been enemies for centuries now explored joint technological developments. Kriela's sensory tendrils moved in complex patterns, a communication method that now carried both her traditional Zarkon diplomatic signals and a new hybrid form of expression. She was no longer just an observer. She was a participant in something revolutionary. Dr. Elena Rodriguez presented the final research findings. The quantum transfer was more than a technological anomaly. It was a new form of interspecies communication that challenged everything previously understood about diplomatic interaction. We are witnessing the emergence of a new diplomatic paradigm, Rodriguez explained. Her holographic presentation showed neural network maps that defied traditional understanding. The quantum entanglement between Marcus and Kriela had created something entirely unprecedented. The assembly hall itself seemed to respond. Environmental systems shifted, creating unique communication zones that facilitated understanding across multiple species. The most radical proposal came next. The Galactic Confederation would establish a new diplomatic corps, one that explicitly valued cross-species neural integration. Diplomats would be trained not just in protocols, but in the art of genuine understanding. Humanity's greatest strength, Marcus explained, drawing from both his own experiences and Kriela's accumulated knowledge, is the capacity to reimagine potential. Kriela, who had begun this journey in pure diplomatic outrage, now stood as a testament to transformation. Her multiple sensory tendrils created a communication pattern that was part acknowledgement, part excitement about future possibilities. The final resolution was unprecedented. The quantum diplomatic transfer would not be reversed or contained. It would be studied, celebrated, and used as a model for future interspecies collaboration. Outside the assembly hall, entire star systems seemed to pause. Something fundamental had changed in how civilizations would communicate, understand, and potentially coexist. Marcus looked at Kriela. She looked back. What had begun as a technological accident had become a revolution. The stars continued their silent dance, indifferent to the profound transformation unfolding within the Galactic Confederation. But everything had changed, and nothing would ever be the same again.